Obsession is a supernatural psychological horror film that explores the theme of unrequited love obsession and the terrifying consequences of a forced desire. This is the story of a shy man who dares to make a request to a mystical object in order to win the woman he longs for. His wish does come true, but it must be paid for with a very high, dark, and horrifying price. Join me as we dive into the storyline of the film Obsession, 2026. One morning at a restaurant, a quiet and shy man named Bear is chatting with his best friend. They discuss Bear's feelings for their coworker, Nikki. However, the shyness that has always been a part of him prevents Bear from finding the courage to confess his feelings directly. Bear reasons that he still has plenty of time to gather his courage before finally expressing his feelings to Nikki. For him, there's no reason to rush. After returning from the restaurant, Bear goes back to the old house inherited from his grandmother. But upon arriving, the peaceful atmosphere turns to sorrow. He is both shocked and devastated to find that his pet cat, Sandy, has died after accidentally eating medication left behind in the house. This loss causes Bear to lock himself in his room. His grief deepens when suddenly his phone rings. The caller is Nikki. During their conversation, Nikki tells him that she has submitted her resignation from work. Before ending the call, she also invites Bear to meet up later that night. However, shortly after the call ends, Nikki's necklace falls into a drain and is lost. Wanting to help, Bear takes the initiative to find a replacement necklace. He goes to a shop that sells crystals, mystical objects, and various old, mysterious antiques. While browsing in the shop, his gaze falls upon a unique object that immediately captures his attention. It is a tree-shaped trinket known as the One Wish Tree. According to the shop owner, this object has the power to grant one wish to its owner. However, there is one rule that must not be broken. Each person is only given one chance to make a single wish in their lifetime. Driven by intense curiosity, Bear eventually decides to buy the object. At the same time, he also buys a new necklace, which he plans to give to Nikki as a replacement for the lost one. That evening, the story shifts as Bear spends time with Nikki, Sarah, and a few other friends in a cheerful atmosphere. The night is filled with laughter, casual conversation, and various enjoyable moments that make everyone appreciate being together. Amidst this setting, his friends once again encourage Bear to finally confess his feelings to Nikki. But as usual, Bear still cannot muster the courage to say what he has been holding inside all this time. Time passes, and before they know it, the night comes to an end. One by one, they prepare to head home. On the way home, a moment that should have been romantic and memorable, an unexpected confession changes everything. Sarah says that she actually has feelings for Bear and wants to know how Bear feels about her. Hearing this question, Bear falls silent for a moment before finally giving his answer. But that answer will become the beginning of a series of far more complicated and terrifying events to come. Not long after, they arrived at Nikki's house. But before parting ways, a moment Bear had long been hoping for came unexpectedly. Hesitantly, Nikki asked whether Bear actually had feelings for her. That question made Bear pause for a moment. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Unfortunately, his nervousness and fear once again took over. Instead of revealing his true feelings, Bear said that he only thought of Nikki as a friend. Hearing that answer, Nikki didn't say much. She simply went into her house and closed the door, leaving Bear immediately consumed by regret. At that moment, he felt like the stupidest person in the world for having wasted a golden opportunity that might never come again. In deep despair and disappointment, Bear went home. Driven by frustration, he took out the One Wish Tree he had just bought. Filled with hope, he broke off a piece of the tree and made a wish. He wished for Nikki to love him more than anyone else in the world. But without realizing it, that simple utterance had awakened something far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. Not long after the wish was spoken, his doorbell rang. When he opened the door, Bear was shocked to see Nikki standing on his porch. Nikki came up to him and led Bear inside the house. From that moment on, Nikki's behavior began to feel strange and confusing to Bear. She kept asking Bear to stay close to her and seemed unwilling to be apart from him even for a moment. Her sudden shift to such aggressive behavior made Bear assume that perhaps Nikki was under the influence of alcohol or experiencing emotional distress. A short while later, Nikki got into Bear's car and asked him to drive her away from there. During the ride, Nikki started to cry. In a trembling voice, she confessed that she was very sad because her father, who had been estranged from her for a long time, was now suffering from cancer. Hearing this confession, Bear felt pity. he decided to take Nikki back to her house. As he helped Nikki to her room, the woman apologized for her strange behavior throughout the night. But moments later, she surprised Bear again by asking him to stay with her while she slept because she was afraid of being alone. The atmosphere between them slowly became more intimate. However, before things could develop further, Nikki suddenly experienced a disturbance and looked very frightened. She kept apologizing while trying to explain something that even Bear had difficulty understanding. That night ended full of unanswered questions. When Nikki finally fell asleep, Bear couldn't close his eyes. The strange events that kept occurring made him feel uneasy. Because of this, he began searching for information about the one wish tree he had used. But his search only made things more confusing. On the internet, he found many conflicting stories. Some people said the object was nothing but a hoax and had no power whatsoever. But others insisted that the object truly could grant wishes, though always accompanied by terrifying consequences. The next morning, Bear woke up and found that Nikki was already awake. The woman had even prepared breakfast for them. At first, everything seemed normal. But the calm quickly turned to horror when Bear saw something terrifying on his floor. Sandy's corpse, his dead pet cat, was now lying in the middle of the room, surrounded by dozens of lit candles. That eerie sight gave Bear goosebumps. He couldn't understand how the cat's corpse could have gotten there or who had arranged those candles. Despite being haunted by fear and confusion due to the various strange events that kept appearing, the two of them still went to work as usual. They worked at a used musical instrument store owned by Sarah's father. Upon arriving at work, Bear told Sarah about the various bizarre experiences he had been through. He described Nikki's drastic change in behavior, her sudden arrival, and the various strange incidents that had occurred since the night before. But there was one thing he deliberately didn't tell her: the one wish tree and the wish he had made using that object. As the conversation went on, Bear noticed something that made his hair stand on end. From a distance, Nikki was watching him non-stop. What initially seemed like a loving gaze now felt disturbing and terrifying. There was something in her eyes that made Bear uncomfortable, as if the woman was watching him at every moment and didn't want to lose sight of him for a second. And after work ended, the situation that was already feeling abnormal would escalate into something far more terrifying. After work ended, the situation that was already feeling abnormal escalated further in an alarming direction. Sarah eventually decided to get a ride home with Ian. Before leaving, Ian assured Bear that he would try to talk to Nikki and find out what was really going on. That evening, Ian called Bear. During the conversation, he said that Nikki claimed to be taking certain medications that might be affecting her behavior. But before Ian could explain further, a knocking sound suddenly came from Bear's front door. When he opened the door, Bear was shocked to see Nikki already standing there. With a face that looked calmer than before, Nikki asked permission to stay over one more night. She then apologized for all her strange behavior over the past few days and said it was all because of the side effects of the medication she was taking. After the atmosphere began to ease, Nikki said something Bear never expected. With deep emotion, Nikki confessed that she had very strong romantic feelings for Bear. Of course, that confession made Bear very happy. This was what he had always dreamed of. Without hesitation, he welcomed those feelings gladly. And that night marked the official beginning of their relationship as a couple. After that confession, Bear and Nikki seemed inseparable. They spent almost all their time together. They went to various places, did activities like any couple madly in love, and were always seen side by side wherever they went. Even at work, their closeness became increasingly apparent to Sarah and the other coworkers. But that happiness slowly began to show its dark side. One night, while Bear and Nikki were eating together at a restaurant, Bear's phone rang. The caller was Ian. In a serious tone of voice, Ian conveyed something that left Bear speechless. He said that he had checked on Nikki's father's condition and discovered a shocking fact. Nikki's father was not being treated at the hospital like Nikki had previously claimed. Hearing this, Bear began to feel anxious. The unease he had been ignoring slowly resurfaced. Moreover, Ian warned him that something felt very wrong about this entire situation. After hanging up and returning to the table, Bear tried to dig up more information about Nikki's father and her family situation. But that simple question triggered an unexpected reaction. Nikki immediately looked panicked. Her voice changed, her emotions exploded, and she started shouting in the middle of the restaurant. Her behavior became uncontrollable, drawing the attention of many people around them. Bear could only stay silent, growing more convinced that Nikki was hiding something. That night, Bear suddenly woke from his sleep. In the dim light of the night, he saw Nikki sitting in the corner of the room, crying by herself. The sight felt very strange. When Bear approached her and asked what was wrong, Nikki confessed that she was afraid. She was afraid that Bear didn't love her as much as she loved him. The words sounded simple, but the way Nikki said them made Bear's skin crawl. There was something unhealthy about the intensity of the feelings she was showing. Not long after, Nikki got back onto the bed and lay down next to Bear. But when Bear tried to put a little space between them, Nikki immediately panicked. In a trembling voice, she asked him to stay close to her and not move away at all. The next morning, Bear was once again shocked. When he woke up, he found that Nikki had prepared lunch for him as usual. But this time, there was something far stranger. Nikki had taped the door shut. Bear didn't understand the reason behind that action. Filled with both confusion and fear, he immediately removed the tape and forced the door open. Behind him, Nikki just stood there watching with a smile that felt increasingly disturbing. That look made Bear feel as if he was being watched at every moment. Upon arriving at work, he opened the lunchbox that Nikki had prepared. Inside, Bear found several neatly arranged photos of himself with Nikki. That discovery alone was enough to make him uncomfortable. But a short while later, he realized something far more terrifying. The food Nikki had prepared contained meat he didn't recognize. That discovery immediately made Bear lose his appetite. The various strange events he had been trying to ignore were now beginning to form an increasingly eerie pattern. And without him realizing it, Nikki's obsession with him had grown to a far more dangerous level than he ever could have imagined. The more strange events Bear experienced, the more convinced he became that something was very wrong with their relationship. Because of this, he once again recounted Nikki's bizarre behavior to Sarah. Honestly, Sarah admitted that Bear and Nikki's sudden relationship did feel very strange. In her opinion, Nikki's change of feelings happened too quickly and didn't seem natural at all. After work ended, Sarah got a ride home with Bear. Throughout the drive, the two of them discussed Nikki's increasingly concerning behavior. According to Sarah, Nikki was likely experiencing a far more serious problem than they had thought. She even felt that the situation had become dangerous. That was why Sarah invited Bear to come to her house that night. She said that several of her male friends would also be gathering there, so the event was only for the guys. Meanwhile, upon arriving home, Bear gazed once more at the one-wish tree that had been the start of all this chaos. The thought of the wish he had spoken continued to haunt him. The more he remembered all the events that had occurred since that night, the greater his suspicion grew that the object was indeed connected to the terrifying changes Nikki was experiencing. Unable to bear his curiosity and fear any longer, Bear finally decided to call the phone number listed on the object's packaging. Not long after, his call connected. With a voice filled with anxiety, Bear asked if there was any way to cancel a wish made using the one-wish tree. But the answer he received made his blood run cold. The man on the other end of the line replied in a flat, eerie tone that a wish that had been granted could not be cancelled. When Bear continued to press, the man finally explained something far more terrifying. According to him, the curse resulting from such a wish would only end when the person who made the wish had died. Hearing that answer, Bear fell silent. Now he realized that he might have trapped himself in something that could no longer be fixed. When he finally arrived home that night, Bear was once again shocked by an unexpected sight. He found Nikki already inside his house. Calmly, Nikki said that she was just waiting for Bear to come home. Not long after, while Nikki was showering, Bear confronted her about the strange lunch she had prepared earlier. He also told her that he had received an invitation to an all-male party that night. But Nikki's response immediately changed. She claimed that Sarah had contacted her first and said that she would also be coming to the party. Hearing this, Bear felt confused. In turn, Nikki looked annoyed, thinking Bear was lying to her. With an increasingly emotional tone, Nikki insisted that the world seemed to be trying to tear them apart. Despite feeling uncomfortable, Bear ended up bringing Nikki to the party anyway. That decision turned out to be the beginning of an even greater chaos. As soon as they arrived, Nikki immediately displayed behavior that made everyone feel awkward. As the night went on, her behavior became increasingly difficult to control. She laughed too loudly at moments that weren't funny, interrupted other people's conversations, and kept trying to be the center of attention. At first, the guests tried to ignore her, but things changed when a group game began. In the middle of the game, Nikki started speaking in a very strange way. The sentences coming out of her mouth sounded nonsensical and turned the once lively room suddenly silent. Everyone exchanged glances with confused and frightened expressions. The tension escalated further when Nikki, overcome with jealousy, saw Bear sitting next to Sarah. Without warning, she walked over to them. Then, in front of everyone, Nikki forcibly pulled Sarah away from Bear. That action shocked all the guests, but the situation didn't stop there. Moments later, Nikki asked Bear to kiss her in front of everyone. That request made the atmosphere increasingly uncomfortable. Bear looked confused while the guests could only watch awkwardly. The tension filling the room finally reached its peak when Nikki suddenly began screaming hysterically. In an uncontrolled outburst of emotion, she grabbed a glass bottle, smashed it, and then without hesitation stabbed the broken piece of the bottle into her own face. Screams filled the room. Everyone panicked. The party that had been relaxed turned into total chaos within seconds. There was nothing left to do but stop the commotion as quickly as possible. Eventually, Bear and Nikki were asked to leave the party. Throughout the drive home, the atmosphere between them was filled with suffocating silence. Upon arriving home, Bear could no longer contain his emotions. He confronted Nikki about all her obsessive behavior and extreme actions that were increasingly spiraling out of control. With the frustration he had been suppressing for so long, Bear finally poured out all the anxiety that had been haunting him for days. But he had not yet realized that this confrontation would trigger something far more terrifying than all the events he had experienced before. The confrontation that occurred after they returned from the party became the point where Bear could no longer hide his feelings. With great frustration, he said that he just wanted Nikki to love him normally. He did not want a relationship filled with fear, excessive jealousy, or obsessive behavior that was increasingly difficult to control. Hearing this, Nikki looked deeply hurt. For the first time, she honestly admitted what she truly felt. Nikki said that she was very jealous of Sarah because she was certain that Sarah also had feelings for Bear. In her opinion, Sarah's presence always made her feel threatened. Bear tried to calm the situation. He attempted to speak gently and suggested that Nikki go back to her own house for a while until her condition improved. But as soon as she heard that suggestion, Nikki's emotions collapsed again. Within seconds, she lost control of herself. While crying, Nikki kept begging Bear not to leave her. Desperately, she even said that she was willing to be whatever Bear wanted as long as she was not left alone. Seeing Nikki's increasingly unstable condition, Bear began to worry that something bad would happen if he forced her to leave. For that reason, he eventually allowed Nikki to stay that night. The night passed with an increasingly suffocating atmosphere. While they were both asleep, Bear's phone suddenly vibrated. He received an urgent message from Sarah asking him to meet immediately. Feeling that something was important, Bear quietly left the house so he could call Sarah without Nikki knowing. But at almost the same moment, something horrifying occurred. While Bear was outside, Nikki's original soul seemed to briefly resurface from beneath the influence of the mysterious force controlling her. In a state of great suffering, she warned Bear about the danger they were facing. With a frightened voice, Nikki begged Bear to kill her. According to her, that was the only way to free her from the entity or force that had taken over her soul. Not long after, the story shifts to Bear meeting with Sarah. There, they discussed Nikki's increasingly unstable condition day by day. Sarah argued that Nikki was emotionally manipulating Bear and taking advantage of his feelings. Then Sarah revealed a fact that Bear had not known. Turned out that Ian and Nikki had been in a relationship for about 2 years. Hearing this, Bear grew even more confused. According to Sarah, it was possible that Nikki was deliberately using Bear to provoke Ian's jealousy and anger. But before they could discuss it further, the conversation suddenly stopped. A loud noise shattered the silence of the night. In an instant, Nikki's figure appeared suddenly. With unbelievable strength, she shattered the glass and brutally attacked Sarah. Bear could only watch in horror as the assault continued relentlessly. No matter how hard he tried to stop it, everything happened too quickly. A short while later, Sarah died as a result of that horrific attack. Bear immediately returned to the antique shop where he had bought the one-wish tree. He hoped there was still a way to fix all the chaos that had occurred. Upon arriving there, Bear tried to buy a similar object and intended to make a new wish, but his attempt failed. He then learned that each person was only allowed to make one wish in their lifetime. Because his wish had already been used, there was no second chance for him. In desperation, Bear finally met with Ian and told him everything. For the first time, he confessed about the one-wish tree, the curse that emerged after his wish was granted, and the various horrific events that had occurred since then. Bear begged Ian to use his opportunity. He hoped Ian would be willing to make a wish that could change everything, as if Bear had never made that wish in the first place. But Ian did not believe the story at all. To him, everything Bear said sounded like nonsensical rubbish. In a relaxed and doubtful tone, Ian instead joked by saying that if the object was truly magical, he wanted to get $1 million. That sentence had barely left his mouth when something impossible happened. In an instant, piles of cash in large amounts began falling in front of them. That sight left Ian speechless. His face turned pale in disbelief at what he had just witnessed. Upon returning home, he was immediately confronted with a sight that made his skin crawl. A strange and eerie shrine had been set up in the living room. In the middle of the room, Nikki was behaving more and more abnormally. She imitated Ian's voice, wore his clothes, drew fake tattoos on her body with markers, and even tried smoking simply because she believed that all of it would make Bear love her more. That sight made Bear realize that the figure before him was drifting further and further away from the Nikki he once knew. Suddenly, Ian appeared, but before he could do anything, Nikki immediately raised a weapon and shot him dead. The sound of gunfire echoed throughout the house. Ian's body collapsed to the floor without putting up any resistance. After that, Nikki turned her attention back to Bear. With explosive emotion, she demanded that Bear say he loved her. Bear, exhausted both physically and mentally, no longer had the strength to fight back. Finally, he gave in to Nikki's demand. The curse had destroyed his life, destroyed Nikki's life, and taken the lives of those around them. In deep despair, Bear took Nikki's gun and locked himself in the bathroom. He intended to end everything forever. With trembling hands, he aimed the weapon at himself. But in the final moments, his courage failed him. He hesitated. Meanwhile, from behind the door, Nikki kept coaxing him to come out. In a soft, suffocating voice, she said that she was considering ending their relationship. That statement actually made Bear make a different decision. He opened the medicine cabinet and found the pills that had previously caused Sandy's death. After staring at the bottle for a moment, Bear finally swallowed all of its contents. In his mind, his death might be the only way to free Nikki from the curse that had bound her soul. But moments later, as the effects of the drugs began to take hold, Bear was overcome with doubt. Reflexively, he tried to vomit up the pills he had swallowed. At the same time, Nikki found the remaining piece of the one-wish tree stored under the table. Without a second thought, she broke it off. Filled with hope, she spoke a final wish. She wished for Bear to love her. The wish took effect immediately. Not long after, Bear, whose body was growing weak, came out of the bathroom. His vision began to blur. His steps grew unsteady. Before him, Nikki stood staring at him with eyes full of love. For the first time in a long while, Bear returned that gaze with a sincere yet weak smile. A few seconds later, his body collapsed into Nikki's arms. The effects of the overdose began to paralyze his entire body. Nikki cried as she held Bear tightly. She kept begging Bear to hold on, but it was all too late. Slowly, Bear's life began to leave his body. In deep despair, Nikki picked up the weapon and placed the barrel into her own mouth. She no longer had any reason to live. But just as Bear breathed his last breath, something unexpected happened. The force that had been controlling her suddenly vanished. Nikki's original soul finally returned completely. The curse had ended. Nikki regained her consciousness. With confusion and fear, she looked around the room. Ian's body lay lifeless. The house was filled with traces of chaos and blood. Then her gaze fell upon Bear, lying motionless in her arms. At that moment, all the memories of the horrifying events that had occurred came crashing back into her mind. That is all from me. Thank you for following the storyline of this film, and see you in the next film recap.